Gonna give folks some time to get set up. Thanks for logging in early.
Because I don't mind coming here from Bay Farm, but in place else, I'm really conscious, so I thought we were going to be in downtown Berkeley.
Well, that
I know that
works better for Carla.
her. Yeah.
Works better for Carla.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Greenpeace webinar series. This week, we are going to tackle social media and online organizing. Goal of today's webinar is to give you tools for organizing and explore the ways that we can use social media, the internet, and online communications for our justice movements. So thank you. Let's take a moment to get familiar with this really exciting Zoom webinar technology that we're using. So if this is your first time on a webinar, just take a moment to get familiar with the user bar that's shown on this page. Please put yourself on mute, which is a little phone with a cross, so we can be sure to hear. And if you would like to participate, you can click the raise hand function or just enter in the chat screen and I can unmute you. For tonight, we're going to be using the chat box function a lot, so feel free to enter in your thoughts, your questions that come up. And why don't folks go ahead, if you haven't already introduced yourself, please introduce yourself in the chat box along with the city that you're in right now. Awesome. Hello to Ted, who's in Annapolis. What's up to Rita in Washington, D.C.? Monica sending some love from San Francisco, California. We've got Jim calling in from Arlington, Texas. Who else is on here? Thanks for logging in. It's really exciting to see folks from all across the country. My name is Adrian. I'm chiming in from Oakland, California. Hey, Brad, what's up in Ohio? Cool. All right, cool. So to get us started today, I wanted to let you all know who your facilitators are, and I will unmute you, Ryan. My name is Adrian. I am the Leadership Development Coordinator and Trainer here at the Greenpeace USA office in San Francisco. I will be co-facilitating today with Ryan. Can you tell folks about yourself, Ryan?
Hi, everyone. My name's Ryan. I'm a producer on the online strategy team for Greenpeace USA. Also based in San Francisco, but I did spend 4 years in DC. So hello to everybody calling in from over there on the East Coast. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you guys about our take on digital organizing and also what we're seeing in the movement right now. And we have a lot of GIFs in this presentation. So Betty White is just an introduction of what it's going to look like.
Yeah, big ups to Ryan and the online team for bringing together some of their best practices and sharing out some tools. We will have a very exciting training with some gifts, some videos, activities. So I invite folks to be as present as possible in tonight's training. So if you need to get something to write down notes with, if you need to get yourself a cup of water, maybe put in some headphones or get into a quiet place, now is the time to do that. And today, right now, we are doing online organizing. We're going to explore how to use the internet and social media as a tool for change. Media is very important. It's been a huge factor in our current political climate and shifting public opinions. With a lot of our civil liberties and privacy under attack, it's important that you know how to defend yourself from surveillance. So whether you're organizing in a remote area, if you're using social media to recruit people to your event, or simply trying to amplify your message for justice, media is going to be a really important tool that we'll be working with. So thank you. Awesome. So I wanted to make sure that you all know who you are working with right now. We are Greenpeace. We are the leading independent campaigning organization that uses peaceful protest and creative communication to expose environmental problems and to promote solutions for a green and peaceful future. From protesting US nuclear testing in our oceans in 1971 to our solidarity work at Standing Rock, Greenpeace has been a leader in the fight for environmental justice. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. To get us started, we are going to do a little icebreaker. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna invite folks, I'm gonna drop a link into this chat box. And cool, thanks for saying that, Carla. So yes, we do have access to the presentation afterwards in case we don't catch everything in the first time. So in the chat box, you should see a link that I just dropped. It's the same screen that you should be seeing. And I want you all to go ahead and click over to there. Let's see. And I want you to pick a box, put your name in it, and answer the question as best you can of how comfortable are you with using social media. So just to get a sense of where folks are at, who we're talking to, pick a box, put your name in it, you can edit it, and then drag it anywhere that you would like on this timeline. So I'm gonna go ahead and put myself right about here. And I invite you to do the same. Cool. So we've got Ryan, who's on the far end of the spectrum, who's our co-facilitator tonight. So I'm glad that you're a pro. That's why you're part of the team. I'm a little bit behind Ryan, as community organizing is my strong strength. We've got Jane, who's in between fairly familiar and a pro. We've also got Brad, who's a little bit closer to fairly familiar. I'm wondering if there's any folks that fall more to the left side of the spectrum. If some folks are not comfortable and here to learn, I'll give you a couple more seconds to go ahead and finalize your responses. All right, cool. So I see some folks are drawing some lines, and it's great. We've got folks that are pretty fairly familiar and somewhere in between a pro. So I'm really excited for our conversation. Seems that we have got a lot of learning to do. I know we've got a lot of knowledge in this room that we can teach each other. Let's see, and Carla West, who's not able to add your name. Carla, in the chat box, could you let us know where you would put yourself? Somewhere in the middle. Cool. Sweet. Awesome. Thank you for engaging with this little online game that we're doing together. It's one way that I like to see. I love Google Docs. It's a great way to share information, to get folks connected. And this is one tool that we're going to explore tonight in online organizing. Cool. So we've got Ted. I'm sorry, Ted has got some connection problems. So hopefully we can get you back logged on, Ted. Stay tuned in the chat for more details. Okay. So let's see, I'm gonna put us back over on this page. So thanks everyone. I'm wondering in the chat box, write some things that came up for you when you were selecting a spot. So when thinking about social media, why are you somewhere between fairly familiar and I'm a pro? Let's see. Lisa says, I would be near the left end. Cool. So I'm glad you're here to learn. And Teresa is also trying to add a name. Cool. Well, if you're not able to, if you're having issues, no worries. We're going to keep on trekking along. Let's see. Thanks for engaging with us. I'm going to do my best to get everyone on the same page. So Ryan says, I put myself near pro, but not at the end, because online tools are constantly evolving and there is always something new to learn no matter how experienced you are. That is very true. We live in a world that is fastly changing every day. With the internet and technology, we're connected, and it can feel like a lot sometimes to stay up to pace. Kelly is, I am near pro because I use Facebook extensively, managing groups, pages, etc. I'm great with Twitter, but I do not understand Snapchat. Right on. All right, I'm gonna mute somebody. Okay, cool. Thanks, folks. So next slide, you'll see a really exciting animated GIF. Thanks for sharing your responses. Media is a powerful tool for connecting, sharing a message, and reaching a wide audience. Today, we're gonna talk about ways that we can use social media as a tool for change in a world that's always changing. The internet and social media have changed the way that we connect, we share information, learn from each other, and raise awareness about our issues. Whether it's if you're using Facebook, Twitter, Periscope, Snapchat, or any app, these platforms can help us build power collectively. So let's see. Ted says, I'm having problems. My Zoom keeps crashing. All right, I will connect with you offline in just a moment, Ted. Thanks for flagging that. Seems like the technology world might be winning. Cool. So next up, we're going to hear from Ryan. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you can take it away.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So we're going to get into, we're going to start with a little bit of the sort of conceptual frame behind online organizing and then get into the nuts and bolts. And it seems like more folks put themselves on the advanced side of the spectrum for this, but I think this is something that's going to be applicable for everyone on the webinar right So some of you might have seen a graphic similar to this in your organizing life, whether in the online context or not. So this is this pyramid is something that we think of as the ladder of engagement. It's a tool to help you think about how individuals are going to interact with your campaign or your organization or the cause that you're trying to organize around. So the basic idea behind this is that as folks climb up the ladder vertically, they become more involved, more invested in your campaign, and the way that you communicate with them changes. And as the level of involvement increases, the number of folks willing to make that type of investment, whether it's their time, their money, their emotional efforts, decreases. So that's the horizontal. So what you end up with is kind of a pyramid, where on the bottom you have folks that are willing to observe and pay attention to your efforts, but they might not be interacting with you actively. And at the top you have a really small number of extremely dedicated folks that are leading. They're really co-leading with you in many ways. Also, like Adrian mentioned, I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat box as well. So if you have questions about any of this as I'm talking, feel free to type in there right in as we go. And so when we're talking about online organizing and digital tools, most of that tends to happen in the bottom half of that pyramid. So the way that we communicate with people using online tools tends to be more mass interactions, more automated, a little bit less two-way. The more involved people get, the more your interactions with them become something personal and one-on-one. And that's where that online to offline switch happens, when we're trying to move people from observing to following to endorsing to contributing. So we're going to drill into the bottom half of this pyramid today and talk about the different online tools that we have. So I listed out here on the graphic some of the things that we think of as serving these different audiences. So we might think of like a website or a blog as serving the observing audience. That's where they go to get educated. Our social media platforms as serving our followers. Email or a text list that you might have. I think we could maybe add phone banking in there too, although that gets a little bit higher up on the ladder towards endorsing. And then a community like Greenwire, where folks have signed up specifically to be able to take action offline and get involved in deeper ways. That would be towards the contributing level. So we're going to drill deeper into each of these now and kind of what that looks like and the way that you can use digital tools to interact with those folks. If you want to go to the next slide. And I'll mention here that that's not this idea is not something that Greenpeace made up, but it's something that we use and we really rely upon to inform our digital engagement strategy. So let's start at the bottom. We're going to talk about observers. So observers want to get to know you and your work. Your job is to educate them about the issue and compel them to come back. So usually observers are someone that you think of as interacting with you for the first time. Or interacting with you in a relatively shallow way. So you'll reach the most observers, but you'll have the sort of broadest, most lightest touch type of interactions with them. So when they come back, you want to make it really easy for them to take that next step to become a follower and opt in to receiving more of your information. So for example, what I've got on the screen here is, let's say that I'm somebody who's interested in doing work around deforestation, and I'm just getting started, and I Google, what are the solutions to deforestation? One of the first things that comes up is this page on Greenpeace's website about solutions to deforestation. And so I might click on that, and then when I get to that, over on the right, you'll see that on that page, you don't see on that page that what we have is educational information, very accessible, not written for technical experts, but written for people who are new to this, because we know that that's who's coming to that page. People who are observing our work, and written in a way that's geared to get them to want to do more. And on that page are multiple ways to follow Greenpeace on social media. So we put in one place, you want to make it easy for them to follow you if they like it, and you want to give them a reason to do that through what you're telling them. So that's an example of trying to educate your observers and then walk them up to that next level of followers. But most people on this call, either through your personal platforms or through organizational networks that you might be working with, probably already have a base of followers. So you're not just talking about starting from scratch, you're talking about growing that and then activating those followers, which is the next thing that we're going to talk about. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So activating your followers. So think about who your followers are in the digital context. They're folks that have, sorry, the lights in here are censored, so they just turned off when I stopped moving. Anyway, your followers are folks that have indicated that they're interested in your work. They want to receive information from you, but they're probably not yet helping you advance that work at scale. And I say at scale because followers might do things like retweet or share on Facebook, and that is advancing the work. That's helpful. We don't want to discount that. But when we're talking about standing up to Trump's cabinet nominations or trying to get the Congress to block his proposed budget, that's not really the scale of action we need from the people we're trying to organize. So getting them to that next level is about getting them to step up to that action. And from here, your job is to show what's in it for them. How will their action move the needle and make that goal that you have more attainable? And so followers, they want to hear from you, but they don't yet trust you enough to share their data. That's a key difference between a follower, someone we think of as a follower, and an endorser. So if you think of somebody who follows you on Twitter, they've said, I would like to hear from you, but only when I feel like checking my social media, and you're not going to have any of my data, any of my personal information. So that's another level of trust, and it also gives you as an organizer another way of communicating with them that's really valuable. So to earn that level of trust, you have to consistently activate those followers. So the example on the left is something that Greenpeace ran pretty shortly after the election and through the inauguration. And we still run things similar to this, but this is an opportunity that we promoted on Twitter, so for our followers, to be able to join our text list by texting the word resist to 877-877. And they were opting into getting a call script every Wednesday and instructions on how to call their member of Congress or their senator to stand up to a different thing related to Trump's agenda. And that was a weekly action. So there's two things about that. One is that's a pretty markedly different level of commitment from our followers. They're not just digesting the information and sharing it. They're taking an action. They're taking a measurable action. They're calling their senator. And they're also, by joining our text list, saying, yes, Greenpeace, I trust you with my data. I trust you to text me. So it's not just when they decide they want to hear from Greenpeace and they go on their Twitter feed. It's when Greenpeace says, hey, this is urgent. Like you need to know about this opportunity right now, because the text is very immediate. And they've decided to trust us with that information. That trust is extremely important. And at Greenpeace, we value that a lot. And as organizers, building that trust is really hard, but eroding it can happen very quickly. So once you've gotten people to give you that trust and move to that endorser level, that's a really important thing to honor. So let's talk about how we honor that with endorsers. Just the next slide. All right, so engaging your endorsers. So like I said, endorsers are on your team. They trust you, they look to you for information, they've given you some of their personal information, and it takes a while to build that with folks, in most cases. And so your job is to consistently provide them ways to get involved and give them room to grow and step up. So an example of that might be, if somebody joined our text list back in November by texting resist, and they've been making those weekly calls every week, they're ready to grow and to move up if they've had a good experience with that. And so the next step might be so these are two examples of a text inviting people to a rally in person in their area. Pretty rapid response. Sometimes a rally, the text will go out that day, and hours later we'll mobilize hundreds of people to these rallies. and that's really where, once you've got people in person and they're willing to show up and take that time out of their lives to do something significant in person, that's that online to offline piece and moving up that ladder to contributors. And that's where the way that you get to interact with them can change significantly. Because once you've got people in person and you can have like a dynamic conversation with them and you have the ability to communicate in a more interactive way rather than just en masse, that's a different type of organizing that, you know, Greenpeace is covering for other webinars. Yeah, and it often takes, you know, a lot of engagement opportunities and consistent, credible, valuable interactions with people who have made it to endorser level to earn that kind of trust to go to the next level, at least in our experience.
Hey, we've got a question from Rosie who's asking, how do you measure the responsiveness of a person? Do you database it or do you analyze it?
That's a really good question. So we measure that in a number of different ways, and I would say it depends on the goal, and it depends on what type of follower they are, or how we're trying to organize with that person or that audience. So on the lower end of the spectrum, so if we're thinking back towards trying to capture those observers and have them become followers, we're looking at like really broad metrics, like the number of people that visit a website, you know, the number of people on our social media list. We're looking at like earned media impressions, metrics like that. So that's like the really broad level. When you're talking about activating followers, we would look at, that's when we would look at like the performance of a specific tweet or Facebook post, you know, like how much engagement, how many retweets or shares or comments did that specific post get? And then at the endorser level, once you have somebody's data, and by that I mean like their email address or their phone number coupled with their name, that's when you can track them on an individual level. So as far as the specific question here about tracking the responsiveness of a person, yeah, if you're using like an email tool, and you don't even have to have a big fancy one, you can use like a MailChimp or TinyLetter, which are either cheap or free, depending on what you want to do. Those will give you the type of metric of, you know, like this person on your list clicked on this link and then you sent them 5 emails and they didn't open it. So that tells you something about that link they clicked on. Maybe that wasn't a good experience for them. That wasn't the engagement experience that they were looking for. Or this person is new to your list, but they've taken every action that you've given them so far. Like you've sent them 5 petitions and like a call action and they've done every single thing. They've clicked on all those links, they've done the thing. That might be a good person to target for a higher level ask. So yes. And there's other like anecdotal ways to look at that too. You know, people aren't just numbers on a page. They comment, they tell you in words how they feel about things if you're putting things out on social media. And that's harder to, you don't want to generalize that to be about your entire audience. But that feedback is valuable and it can tell you something about where your campaign is headed. Any other questions about this sort of more conceptual basis, about the ladder of engagement, about how digital tools fit into that? Cool. So we're going to do an activity now. And just remember the general idea here, more gifts. The general idea is more gifts, and that the types of digital tools that we use at different levels of that ladder change because each of those tools are built for different things, right? It's fairly rare that you mobilize massive numbers of people to an offline action via Instagram, for instance. That might be changing as the way people use Instagram changes, but right now, that's pretty rare. So we're gonna dive into that and start looking at what actual social media content looks like, given everything that we just talked about with an activity. Go for it, to the activity slide. So this is an exercise to get, like I said, to get you thinking about what content looks like, to think about the types of skills and tools you need to build the content to achieve what you want. So there are 4 steps to this activity, and we're going to do this individually, and we can share thoughts in the chat box as we go and ask questions, and then there will be some time to report back via the chat. But the first step is to pick one of these online channels that you use often, or one that you want to use. And if there's one that you use often or you want to use that isn't on that list, go for it. Snapchat was thrown out earlier. You can totally use Snapchat for this example. Next, I want you to match it to the audience in the second column that you think it's most effective for reaching. And so think back to that engagement letter graphic for a reminder of which channels tend to serve the best audiences. And again, if there's an audience that you're like really focused on, you know, maybe it's a local audience, like people on your school board or something like that, feel free to go with that as well. And then I want you to match that channel and that audience to the purpose you think they're best suited for. So you should have a channel, an audience, and a purpose. And given those 3 things, I want you to think about what your content would actually look like if you were trying to use that channel to reach that audience to do that thing. You don't have to actually create anything or write anything out, but try to think out in your head what that would look like. So you can go ahead and get started collecting your thoughts, and I'm just going to give an example as that happens. So for my example, let's say that I want to use my Facebook page to get other volunteers and organizers to make a phone call to Congress about cuts to the EPA. I'm using this example because this is something Greenpeace is doing right now. So what would that post look like? So let's think about channel, audience, and purpose. If my purpose is to get people to make phone calls to Congress about the EPA, I'm asking them to do something not super difficult. It's not like showing up in person, taking time out of their day. They can do it on their lunch break at work, but it's still taking time out of their day, and they have to talk to an actual person. And as a millennial, we hate talking on the phones. So it's true. I'm speaking for millennials right now. We actually do hate talking on the phone. I do anyway. So I know that I'm going to need to grab their attention. I'm going to need to have something that's very compelling. And on Facebook, when you're scrolling through, it's very easy to just scroll past things and ignore them. Gen Xers hates talking on the phone too. Great. So no one likes talking on the phone, but it's a very effective tactic for moving Congress. They have to record phone calls, so we're gonna be doing a lot of it in the next 4 years. So if I'm talking about grabbing people's attention on Facebook, I might create a graphic that uses bold colors to try to catch the eye, rather than just putting it in text. Like if I just put as my status in text, people can easily scroll by that. It also helps with the algorithm that Facebook uses to use an image rather than just text. And so I might use a graphic that's very bold color and has the phone number that I'm asking people to call, like really big and bold. That's the biggest thing that they would want to see. Because if they see one thing, the first thing they see is what they're going to remember. So if they remember that there's a phone number that they can go and they can call, perfect. So that's probably going to be the biggest, boldest thing on my graphic that I'm creating. And then there are a couple other smaller things that I could do. So maybe there's a hashtag associated with this push. I want people to know that there's more to my campaign than just this phone number, that there's other things they can do, and they can find that via the hashtag. So I'm going to put the hashtag polluting Pruitt in the corner, but it's going to be smaller than the phone number because the phone number is my main call to action. Polluting Pruitt is the hashtag for Scott Pruitt, who's the EPA administrator who doesn't believe in climate change or a lot of other things. That's probably enough for my graphic is what I'm thinking. It's bold, it's eye-catching, it's got the phone number. You know, maybe it says, call Congress to protect the EPA, phone number, hashtag, boom. And then there's my caption. So there's the chance that my Facebook followers might not know a lot about what I'm talking about, so I need to set the context for them. I need to do a little bit of education. And so we'll just say that I have a blog up at greenpeace.org/USA/Pruitt, which I do, so I'm going to put it in the chat. That gives them the context that they would need to say, oh, I see what's in this for me. I understand that Scott Pruitt is a threat to climate science and should not be running the EPA. And I feel compelled to make this call now. Some people won't need that. right? If we're talking about followers, they might already have that level of familiarity. If we're talking about endorsers, they almost certainly do, because at this point, you've probably been cultivating them around the EPA for a while. But some people will need that education and that background before they're willing to take the action. So that's also how these channels can sort of fit together. I cheated a little bit because I said I was going to do Facebook, but I also had a blog. Lights. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking now and see if anybody has come up with an example or sort of a working idea that they'd like to share in the chat. Still thinking through it. All right, I see a question. How do you motivate a group to come to an event? So let's talk specifically about that, because that is definitely one of the bigger questions in organizing is how do you take folks that you have online, how do you take that audience that you have online and move them offline? I know Adrian's going to speak a little bit more specifically about this in the end too, but I think we can get into it now. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but of the channels that I listed here, some are definitely better than others for motivating people to come out to an event. And you want to think about who you have on those channels. So like I said, your Instagram followers, for instance, not super likely to see your post and come out to an offline event in general. That's typically not the type of information that people are looking for on Instagram. And they also haven't given you that permission, that trust to communicate with them in real time. They're going to look and see that post whenever they want to. Not saying it's not worth promoting events on Instagram to build that awareness, and also sometimes people are excited about events and they'll get you more followers. But really, the best channels for pulling people online to offline are where you have the most information about them, and that'll be your email, texting, and in the case of something like this where we have a Greenwire, which is a community built for folks who do organizing, that type of thing as well. So for event invites, email is good. Email is not real time, so in a rapid response context, you can send an email invite to event, but you don't necessarily know when people are going to see it. Texting is the most immediate way to communicate with your folks. If you have a text list or if you have a list of phone numbers and can text people out that information. Texting is also can be fairly invasive if you do it too often. So if you have a text list of folks that you're organizing and you text them, every single day, they are going to opt out or they're going to tune you out. But if you only text them in like real rapid response moments and you honor that, then they're pretty likely to take you seriously when you say like, hey, we need to get to this event now. And we'll talk a little bit about what's happening. Also, the more urgency, the wider you can spread that across channels. So we're going to talk a little bit about the example of airport protests that sprang up after the Muslim ban, but that actually broke a lot of the rules, quote unquote, of this online to offline organizing, because a lot of it happened via social media platforms because of the urgency of that moment.
Just want to chime in really quick, Ryan. Say thanks to Rosie, who says text is very personal. And I think one thing that we're going to be talking a lot about here with the two upcoming examples is that relationship building can be a real powerful tool for cultivating your base, and it has to work in conjunction with online organizing. So we'll explore that a little bit more. But thanks for everyone for entering in your questions. And I wanted to just address one other question here that says, what have been the best channels in your experience for movement building among peer orgs? So thanks, Veronica. I can speak a little bit to my experience for movement building in several different organizations that I found that email newsletters, coalition phone calls has been really helpful with mobilizing folks. So if you've got folks that are already on your side per se, and they have a strong base of supporters, it's really helpful just to keep them in the loop, have one-on-ones with them. But I think it's really important to just keep your members informed.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't have much to add to that. I see another question about social media for donations. So what about using social media for donations and fundraising? And so my take on that is that, like I said, the folks that you have access to on social media, by and large, they're at that follower level. Somebody who's giving you money, especially a significant amount of money, or doing something like making a monthly donation, is definitely taking that next step up the ladder. That's a significant investment in your cause. And so that, you know, if you're reaching out on social media to get donations, that would represent like a step up the ladder, right? So the channels that we've seen be more effective for fundraising are those channels where you have your endorsers. So your email, your texting, places where people have signified that they're invested in what you're doing already. However, social media is a really important tool for obviously like building that list, reaching new potential donors as well. If you think of like a lead, like a donor lead, somebody who might potentially donate to your organization, social media is a great place for that. So typically, like, you know, day to day, like we don't see a huge influx of donations from just posting on social media about fundraising. But also in like a rapid response moment, some of that changes, and the more immediacy that you have, the more people might be willing to take that step via Twitter or Facebook or another social media channel, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Ryan. Do you feel ready to explore the first example?
I'm good.
Sweet.
Unless there are any other questions. Cool. So yeah, I think we're going to get into some of what was raised in the chat and some of those questions too as well with this example. So I want to talk through the example of the airport protests against the Muslim ban, both waves of the Muslim ban, because there were airport protests both times around. So a little bit of context for folks who maybe don't remember. January 28th, 2017, a week into the Trump administration, the first version of the Muslim ban was set to go into effect that night. And organizers used digital tools incredibly effectively to create the massive swell of opposition that we saw at airports around the country. So the first step was really compelling observers through the power of storytelling. So if you think about what things were like on January 28th, 2017, we had just had the Women's March prior to that week. There was a banner that was hung over the White House that said resist. There was a lot of national energy around resistance and around obstructing Trump's agenda, and specifically around the Muslim ban, which is one of the most heinous and racist pieces of his agenda. So a lot of people were already watching this and watching it in various places. And so when the JFK protest was really the first one to grow really, really big, thanks to some like very effective local on the ground organizing, people use social media to build that momentum and sort of push that story nationally. And that's what this BuzzFeed News piece looks like. So this BuzzFeed News piece, and there are others, this is just the example that I chose, is telling that story through social media, through the hashtag. The photos, some of the videos from that protest helped spark the call to organize protests around other airports around the country. So activating those people who were then following what was happening in New York, trying to get them to take action near them. And so that's what you see in this tweet on the far left from Adrian Massa, who's a journalist with Think Progress, but also did a lot of reporting and organizing around the airport protests in January. So that was a whole thread of where airport protests were taking place, when they were happening, a Facebook event to connect to those local organizers on the ground. and like that was updated throughout that whole weekend when those airport protests were happening. And so in this case, we're actually seeing something that I would say is like a big jump, right? This is not a case of when people, you know, were observing an issue and then they're like, oh, I think I like this person's take on it, so I'm going to follow them on Twitter. And then, you know, maybe they really liked the information they were providing, so they decided that they would opt in to get emails from that person. And then they got an email and went to a protest. Like, this all happened in the matter of hours. And that's the type of urgency that this moment necessitated. And so it's the type of urgency that it got. And so in some ways, people jumped from followers to contributors and probably even to leaders, if we're thinking about that pyramid, all in the space of this one wave of protests. But that's not where it ended, because Trump's attempts at the Muslim ban did not end. And so a couple weeks ago, when it was rumored that the second version of the Muslim ban would be released and put into effect, there was another wave of airport protests. This one was a little bit smaller, just because there was a little bit less national attention on it. But the organizers who were around for the first one did a really good job of capturing people's data so that they could reach back out and make that second wave of protests just as big and just as visible. And so that's kind of what you're seeing. Oh, if you can go back one more. And that second tweet there from Jess Morales, who is an organizer who's been doing a ton of work around this Occupy Airports movement. They had some time in between the first ban and the second one being released to get that information up on a site. They used Ground Game, which is a platform for distributed organizing. Give people a way also to call their senators, to take action in other ways than just showing up at airports. And so when version 2 came out, they were able to spring into effect pretty quickly, which resulted in the photo that you just saw, which was these really incredible displays of people power. And I think it's important to note here that the media tends to characterize big protests like this, especially when they're tied to like a rapid response moment, as spontaneous. Or like there's this incredible swell that never, you know, was unprecedented. And sometimes it feels like that too for us as organizers when we're there. But in reality, this type of result is the effect of careful organizing and digital storytelling. This does not happen by accident by any means. So it's actually something that, you know, we can look to replicate and build on. And I wouldn't set the expectation that every single thing you do is going to have the result of these airport protests, because that was also coupled with the moment of like, you know, intense national urgency and willingness to take action that we don't often see the like national consciousness in that place. But the tactics behind it are actually replicable. All of that, what I showed you, was done on like consumer facing software. Like, you don't need to be part of an organization and have a budget to maintain those platforms. You can do it through free social media platforms, Google Docs, distributed organizing channels like Ground Game or Action Network that are free and easy to use. And it's the kind of thing that we can actually do, not just let be quote unquote spontaneous.
Hey, Ryan, I've got a question, a little bit about what you were talking right now, but Ted wants to know if there's a good encrypted text tool that allows for group texts.
Yes, thank you for asking about that, Ted. So there's a slide later on in this presentation where I have some good digital security resources. We're not going to dig super deep into digital security in this presentation because it's actually quite a big topic, but most folks recommend Signal as the app for texting, and another one that's just come on that's supposed to address some of the holes with Signal, both the security holes and the like user interface holes, is FireChat, which I haven't used yet, but I've heard good things about. And there's guides linked in the presentation that have more options than that as well. Kelly says FireChat is good. Good to know.
Awesome. Thanks for the amazing questions, everyone. And thanks to Chanel, who is a librarian, who says, this will help in my political organizing, and I can totally use some of these strategies at work. Right on, Kelly. Sweet. All right, folks. So Ryan, I also invite you to chime in on this one, but wanted to give you two kind of examples about how online and offline organizing and engagement can come together in really beautiful ways to create like strong moments to mobilize and build power with your people. So I'm going to take a moment to play this video. If you haven't seen it, it's the Resist banner drop above the White House just a couple weeks ago. Woo! Awesome. Thanks, folks. Monica says, goosebumps, seriously powerful. Ted says, we need more of that. We've got some more questions. So I want to talk a little bit about this. And Ryan, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and invite you to share your thoughts. So yeah, feel free to also continue to share your thoughts and feelings. I know folks are feeling all kinds of things, but this action was one part of a large strategy to mobilize folks, to engage our supporters, to send a message, and to use social media to control that message as well. This event was live streamed through social media platforms like Uprise TV, Facebook Live, and it was a catalyst moment for our Resist house parties as well as our campaign to resist Trump's agenda. So kind of going back a little bit to the ladder that we were talking about in the beginning, you can see how an action like this can kind of bring folks in on multiple levels, whether they are our supporters, whether they are not on our side or opponents. There's something very powerful in this kind of storytelling when it's coming from the people, and also when it's very coherent and a part of a larger strategy. So we asked folks to join us with the hashtag Resist Often. We launched our house parties to get folks engaged in their local communities to build different chapters and to resist Trump's agenda. Cool. And then Ryan, what else would you like to share about this super amazing banner drop that I know you were very intimately involved with?
Yeah, so I got the chance to work on this, and Chanel, I will get to your question after this in the chat box. I got the chance to work on this. I did a lot of training with the activists who deployed the banner on social media and storytelling. And we went into this sort of hoping that the story would be told through their lens, through their eyes, through their words. So Facebook Live became a really, really big and important tactic for us. So there are 4 social live streaming platforms now. There's Facebook Live, Periscope, which is the Twitter streaming app, Instagram Live, and YouTube has a live streaming platform as well. We found that Facebook Live is by far the most effective because we have the largest audience on Facebook. So if you have a larger audience elsewhere in your own work, you might choose a different channel. But also because Facebook in its algorithm is really pushing up live video right now because it's new. And when things are new, Facebook likes to push it into your newsfeed. There's also rumors that Facebook is going to be monetizing live video soon, i.e. putting ads into it, which we don't like, and we're going to use Facebook Live now while we can before that happens. So Facebook Live and that sort of live video storytelling became a really big part of this action. But it's also important to note, like Adrienne said, that the action was really part of a larger effort. It sort of culminated in the house parties and really continues in a lot of ways. And I think it's important to note that in the context of organizing and direct action, these social media platforms, and especially live video, give us access to tools in a way that we never had before. So if you think of the way that people had access to information, it was controlled by the media and the state for a very long time. And social media is changing that more and more and more and more, and so we can sort of take our stories back. And this idea of people taking their stories back is important to resistance. And it became part of the campaign that we were using to engage folks. So the pledge form that Adrienne mentions here, like folks who signed on to that form, like the narrative there was around sort of taking your story back and taking your country back. The media coverage that came out of that, we had much more of a say in what was covered there because they were doing things like pulling the live video from the activists themselves. So this became like both like a symbolic message, obviously, but also like an actual exercise in reclaiming that story. And obviously it generated a lot of attention and momentum around, more tangible things that we could do as well. Like at the time, resist some of Trump's cabinet nominations, and the momentum that was created around this action helped make some of those the most contested cabinet nominations in history. Or opposing the Muslim ban. This was, shortly before that. So yeah, it translated into a lot of offline action as well. Looking at the chat, so Facebook Live drops or won't air some actions regardless of service issues. Yes, this has been an issue that's emerging. It's definitely something to watch. It was a particular issue in Standing Rock. Facebook Live deciding to cut, or I don't know if deciding is the right word. It's pretty opaque what happened. But streams cutting out. Sometimes Facebook says it's because of service. Sometimes it's very clearly not because of service. But yes, that's something to watch and definitely something to consider if you're like, I'm going to do a live stream. Which platform should I choose? If that's a concern, Facebook Live might be something that you want to move away from. I've not heard the same concerns with Periscope or the YouTube streaming. And Instagram Live I just don't recommend because it's very ephemeral and goes away after it's over, which I believe is supposed to change but hasn't yet. Yeah, any other questions? I think there's a few more in the chat that I might have missed. Yes. So this idea that people might see something like this banner drop and be intimidated by the idea that activism means climbing a crane and dropping a banner. That's totally valid. I think what's important to note about the narrative around this action was, you see the activists themselves saying like, I'm just a person, I'm just a regular person. That doesn't mean that everyone who considers themselves just a regular person needs to take that level of action. Obviously, that's not what we need. We don't need banners dropped off of cranes like every single day of every single week, but it catalyzed a lot of momentum. So what you follow up with people who were inspired by that action. You know, a lot of people just came to Greenpeace in that moment, like called us, emailed us, wrote on our Facebook wall, whatever, and said, I want to do something. Those who didn't, you know, we were sending out emails and sending out texts and all of that. Obviously, you're not going to ask them to go like, okay, now you go out and take direct action. You have to meet people where they're at. And I think that over time, redefining what that activism and what that organizing looks like is the way to do that, to break down that sort of fear and intimidation that people might have. And it also means explaining to them the ways in which the things that you might be asking them to do, like show up to a Resist House party or like make a phone call to their representative, can move the needle. So if they understand that calling a senator means it'll be recorded and the staff have to record and count those calls, and that'll be taken into consideration in decision making, it's very different than somebody calling a representative when they don't know what the result of that is.
Yeah.
I want to go back to Chanel's question about how much that costs. That's a pretty complicated question to answer. I don't think there's a single answer to that. So I don't know if I can give a concise answer to how much this costs, but yeah, maybe if you have specific things, we can follow up offline. Is this me or you, Adrian? Should I be talking about online to offline engagement right now?
Oh my gosh, I was talking and I was muted. Wow.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so thanks folks for your engagement thus far, and we'll get to your questions as best as we can. Just feel free to put them in the chat box and we can follow up more. So just remember that social media is one tool out of many that you can use to mobilize people for justice. These tools are effective only if you are building relationships in your organization, with your community group, or your Greenpeace chapter. Facebook can't be the only tool that you use to mobilize. It only works when you're building with a base of supporters through community organizing, working with different people in your community, and building relationships. So throughout this webinar series that we've been having over the last 6 weeks, we've talked about the various ways that we build power. We talked about grassroots organizing, building a base of supporters, how to support your members, talking to people about issues that you care about, having in-person meetings, and more. So the only way that we can lead powerful actions and have those kinds of like resist, banner drop, catalyst moments is if that we are working in coalition with real people. So yeah, this takes a lot of work online and offline. And I'm seeing a thing from Therese who says, love the Greenpeace kayak demonstration. Thank you. Awesome. And that's another great example of digital storytelling too. So remember that this is just one of the many kind of different organizer tools that you can use, but you have to be working in coalition with people and building relationships. Sweet. And Ryan, can you tell us a little bit more about digital security?
Yes. So we had a question about this earlier, so I'll dig into it a little bit more here. So keeping yourself safe online and the people that you're working with is a shared responsibility. And I say that because it doesn't necessarily have to be you who is vulnerable to hacking or trolling or surveillance for you to fall victim to that. It could be somebody that you work with. So this is something that we all need to work together on. So when we bring our organizing online, especially if you're organizing against the state, taking direct action, or even, you know, it doesn't have to be something that you think is particularly controversial to get you on a list somewhere. We're increasingly susceptible to trolling, hacking, and surveillance. And under the Trump administration, it looks like there will be fewer and fewer protections against activists in this realm. So this is something that we increasingly need to be aware So I am not going to go through specific recommendations for digital security now, because like I said, it's a long list of things, but these are two guides that I recommend. So the first is from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. This is a very comprehensive guide around digital security knowledge and skills. It includes step-by-step stuff, sort of self-guided trainings that you can go through, checklists for securing your devices. So all of the questions around specific texting apps and things, it covers that. It also has some materials on like sort of knowing your rights. So if you are stopped at a border or pulled over, you know what your rights are as far as search and seizure of your phone or your computer. But I also want to recognize that we don't all face the same vulnerability to these types of attacks. And those attacks look different depending on who we are. So that's sort of like an emerging field in digital security, is trying to address more intersectionally the vulnerabilities that we have. So one of the best guides that I've seen on this is from Hack Blossom, which is new and looks to be putting out a series of guides around specific intersectional issues in digital security. And it includes a lot of the same types of information that the EFF guide does, but has a specific lens on helping women and women identifying folks online get better prepared for the types of specific attacks that they might face. So I recommend both of those, and there are probably others as well out there.
Awesome. Thank you. Rosie says, that's great. Thanks for sharing this. All right, folks. So we have reached the last slide, or second to last, of our training. I wanted to let you know about some ways to stay engaged with our work. So we've got a debrief form. It's right here. I will drop the link in the chat box very soon. Please fill this out so we can continue to provide the best trainings for you and the most relevant skills and tools for organizers. Our next training is going to be in 2 weeks, and I'm going to be talking about solidarity and meaningful allyship. We talked a lot about online engagement and ways to support folks, and Greenwire is one of the tools that Greenpeace uses. I think it's a great way to find people in your area. I find it to be just one easy way not to kind of separate the personal from the political, and also to stay safe online. I invite you all to text the word resist to 877-877 so you can get updates about trainings, things that are happening, and stay up to date with the work that we're doing. One way that you can also support the work that we're doing is by donating to Greenpeace USA, funded by supporters like you. And if for any folks that are in Texas, we are going to be in Dallas, Texas this weekend, hosting a nonviolent direct action training, partnering with the Center for Peace and Justice in Dallas. So thank you, folks, for all your time and energy. I will drop some of those final links into the chat box. And this is our lovely online team who's sending you a big hello from the top of a mountain in Colorado.
It's our final GIF. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you. And check your emails for any follow-up